Hello everyone. In today's video we will work on the compression of our request, which we are going to be sending from the detector app. So the request of the compression of the request data, request body, and the decompression of this data on the detector API. Okay, so let's start. So first thing we are going to change is the detector API itself. So this we like ideally this decompression should happen at the server level at like before going to our code. So there is already implementation for that. We just need to configure it. But when we use Jetty or Undertown, which are two different kind of supported HTTP servers or Java as like servlet containers for Java for that works with Spring Web. By default, Spring Web comes with Tomcat, but we have to change it. So we are going to use for today. We are going to use Jetty. So two things we have to do. First is to exclude one dependency. So if you check here on the dependencies, let me update. Let me see if everything is clear there. So you see our dependency, you see that Spring Boot Web Starter, we have the starter Tomcat, so we have to remove it. So exclude, then we have group, it's going to be org dot spring framework dot boot, and the what's the name? It's the group and the artifact ID, I think. Artifact ID. I don't think it's artifact ID, but let's check. Let's go here. Quickly Google it. Exclude dependency. That's it. Exclude group and module. Okay, group and module, and then the module is going to be what? It's going to be Spring Boot Starter Tomcat. Spring Boot Starter Tomcat. Okay, let's see. And what's the problem right now? Could not find method. Yeah, that's something else. Excludes, right? Is it? No, exclude group implementation in Groovy. Yeah, that's it. Oh, yeah, we have to write that down here. Okay, that's it. So let's see what's the problem right now. Group Spring Framework Boot Module Spring Boot Starter Tomcat. Have I done something wrong? Spring Framework Boot Spring Boot Starter Tomcat. So can't find exclude. Oh, I did excludes. Okay, so now you see that Tomcat is not here anymore, but now we need to add the other implementation, which is Spring Boot Jetty Starter. Starter Jetty. Let's refresh and let's see if the dependency comes. Yeah, Starter Jetty is here. Great. So that's the first thing we have to do. Now, second thing we have to do is I have a gist here, so we have to have this kind of change the configuration of the Jetty servlet web server itself. So let's just come to our class, create a new API config here, config API config. Great, we copy and paste everything. That's it. So let's just run the application. You see that's going to run properly. So yeah, now it's just running Jetty instead of Tomcat. Not a big deal. Great. Now we have to go to our detector app and we have to do some changes. First, we could just come here and go to our repository or our job. Have our job now. Right, and our job received the detection batch registration, and has a list of detections and everything. But let's do the thing. Let's first import our external, so external detection repository, and that's something which I'm going to tell you. Like there, so usually when we are using the repository, we are using the repository as like fetching the interface, right? But that's a problem, or like we have two problems here. First, the two repositories which you have, if you see them, one of them is just instantiating a version of external only if the prefix or only if the value of equipment mode is equals to stateless, and the queued just instantiates an instance of this object if it's stateful. So it means that we have only one instance of, we cannot have both instances at the same time, which before it made sense, right? Because we had to either use the external detection repository or the queue detection repository. But now that's not true anymore, because when we are running the queued repository, the stateful mode, we also have to use this one on the background. So this logic needs to die. But if we just kill it, what's going to happen? When the application starts as a equipment mode stateful, it will try to create two instances of this, and then it will break. Let me show you. So let's start application right now. And it's basically going to say, hey, you're trying to inject a repository somewhere. I think it's on the service or on the config. Let's check. I think it's still on config. Yeah, it's trying to inject the repository here, but you have two types. I don't know what type you want to use. So it basically complains here. I don't know what type you want to use. So there are two ways for us to do it. We can use a qualifier. So you can come here to the implementation repository and say this is going to be called external detection repository, blah blah blah. And the other is going to call, for example, the in-queued repository, blah blah blah. And then when you want to inject, you have to use the qualifier, for example, and then you specify the name, or even you specify the name here directly. But that's not ideal, right? Because from here, we don't know which we want to import, to inject. So the easier way for us to do it, or a nicer way that will work out well for us, is to have this here as primary. So how is that going to work? So I will keep this as a primary and then run and show you that it works properly. And then I'll explain how this works. Or this broke, why this broke. Have okay, stateful equipment config, but two pings. Wait, have I used the right one? Yeah. Consider, yeah, primary is already here. Summary multiple times. Well, now I'm a bit confused. Are we using this somewhere else here? Queued, external. This one is the primary, should just be doing fine because we have one as a primary, so it means that in case of having a list of this instance, the primary should be the one to be used. So you shouldn't ask and say, hey, like they are true, but this one's the primary, I'm going to use this one instead. Oh, but most probably because of this, let's see. So let's start again. And nope, there is still something going wrong. What's the problem? Interesting. So let me think a bit. So on the config we have the detection repository, and oh yeah, I'm doing it wrong. Just now I noticed I'm doing this primarily on the wrong place. That's not that's the job. Sorry for that. I hope you have noticed this before me, but unfortunately I cannot hear you, right? So we have to do this on the queue detection repository, because that's the place, that's the object which we want to make the primary repository, or the primary instance of the object, right? Now it works fine. Great. So now, so how like, okay, you may ask, why does that work? So, and how this will work? So when we have the equipment mode as stateful, it means that we have two instances. We have the queued instance and the external instance, because now we don't have this logic, this condition anymore. So it will have two instances. But for other places, which is currently only here, where we use an abstract or like an interface, we inject the based on the interface, we will get the queued, and then queued is going to be used here in the processor. But we will also be able to use, like specifically here, not primary, right? But we will be able to use the external repository, detection repository here, because we're injecting the type directly, the instance of type, and not the interface, because we know that external detection repository should always be available, because we need to be able to communicate with the external detection, right, service API. So this will always be here. And what happens if the stateful is not there, so it's like stateless instead. This one is not going to be here, it's not going to be injected. This one will be created, the instance of this, and the instance will be injected here. So the external detection repository will come here, and that's it. And this one will never even start, because as soon as this is stateless, this being is not going to start at all. That's exactly what we want, okay? So that's kind of just for you to keep in mind. We're tweaking a bit. Okay, so I think that's it on that side. So now what we have to do is to have the external repository, and we have to call the register main. So now we have a problem here. Just for us not to have the video, to make the video so like too long, I'm going to have a really bad code here, but then we are going to break it down, or to like refactor on the next video, okay? So what kind of ugly thing I'm going to do here? I'm going to change this logic to just have like a void, and instead of receiving everything here, I will just receive the detection registration itself, and I will make the call here. So do register many, and here I'm going to receive the detection batch registration, right? So we receive the registration itself, and we call this, and that's it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to change the logic here, not to replicate, or not to duplicate. Do register many, and we call the registration. We can even kill this part of the code. Okay, great. So that's what we are going to do for now. We will change that for sure in the next video. Great, that's it. So as soon as we do the registration, we fetch the data, we are going to call this API, the API again, and that's basically it. You can also have this as a file. Yeah, I think that's basically it. Let's see, let's check one thing. Let me check how Artemis is running, or let me check if Artemis is running, because we need to test it right now. Okay, it's here. Queues, yeah, queues are empty. Great. So now, so API is running, right? So now let's come here and update our. Oh, yeah, it's important thing, right? So we just made that. Let's make that work. It should be running fine, because the API should not expect or force the data to be compressed, but it should accept everything fine. So let's just see if the API is being called. In queuing, yeah, data is coming here. So it's in queuing, then after in queuing, we are sending the data. We are just not adding anything here on the external repository. We can make a call. We are just logging it here. Let's log this here instead. Let's see that we're really calling the API v2, okay? Let's see, but most probably it's not most probably, but it's working fine. Yeah, we could see this coming on the API. Great. Now another thing we have to do is we have to change our HTTP client, which is our REST client here, to work with compressing the data itself. So there is one thing we have to do, or two things. First one of that's it. So that's what we have to do. So we need to implement one interceptor. So what interceptor is doing here? It is it's basically it's like a class, or an object which will intercept the request. It will basically get every request, and it's going to compress and doing some specific logic on it. So I'm going to compress the data. That's the important part, and then we'll add some specific headers to it. That's something which we can do it via interceptor. We could also do this on the code. So if we come here and we have this, we could also most probably doing that's assumption from my side. Okay, we most probably can do this somewhere here, but we are going to do this on another level. So we're going to have an interceptor, so we don't need to kind of add this logic here on the client execution itself, the client post execution. So let's create this class support. So I have created this on the support compression. So support compression, and then we call it compressing HTTP client request interceptor. Let's copy the code here, paste it. So what we are basically doing is not a big thing, right? So we are just getting the body, which is a byte array. We are compressing it, so also a byte array. We are adding new headers. So we are adding its content in encoding and accept encoding, and also adding the, or not here, the important thing, we are not adding, but we are replacing content length, because the data, if you see debug the code here, and you don't do this, or if you do an add, the content length is already there. So when the content length is already there, but the content length has the length of the data before being compressed, right? So instead of using the add is going to add one more. So you're going to have a content length with two datas. So the previous content length and the new one. So you don't want to do it. You just want to replace. You want to say, hey, whatever content length you think you had before, now I want to override it. So you're basically replacing the header with the new content, and that's basically it. So that's exactly what we need to do. Okay, so after doing this, we just need to come here to our REST client, and there is a request interceptor, and we can just do a new compressing interceptor, and that's basically it. So now let's run the application again, and let's see if everything is working fine. Yeah, working great. But you can ask, you may ask yourself, right? Is this really working? So let me prove to you that this works. We run the API without the compression, the decompression mechanism. Running fine. And now let's run the client and see if the client will work. Because now we are forcing the client to compress the data, right? So you see that now you're receiving bad requests. Why? Basically because it cannot send the data, because it's saying like it's sending like compressed data that, like here it's just trying to get the string and say, yeah, it's a string, should be JSON, but I don't understand what you're sending, and then I don't see any field from this, so it cannot parse the request, so it fails. So that said, it's clear to you now that, it should be clear to you that the data is being compressed, it's gzipped, and then when we don't have this mechanism on the API to decompress it, we just cannot read the data. Okay, so that's basically it for today. The next video, what we're going to do, we are going to do like a cleanup on this logic here, on the repository itself. We are also going to change the type of serialization, because if you remember in the previous, on one of the previous videos which we had, there was some problem regarding when we changed the location of this class itself, the whole code, or like the reading of the data or consumption of the data from the queue broke, and that's because we are using the default Java serialization for that. We are going to change the serialization as well to serialize all this data as a JSON. Because now, let me see if we can see the data here. We cannot. Let me just run the detector app. So we have some data in the queue, and I will show you that the data which we have right now is, yeah, that's here. So if I see the browse, or yeah, what's the data? Where is the data right now? Queues, and yeah, because we're consuming it. Let me remove the listener. And yeah, I'll just show you that the data which we're persisting right now is basically totally serialized and like a Java serialized, so you cannot really read it from humor perspective. So you see body preview, that's basically what we have, a lot of bytes. So and that's very dependent of the class. So you see, if you change anything in the class, it may break. So that's not what we want, all right? So what we are going to do then, the next video as well, is to fix this. So we are going to do some refactoring on the repository code. We are going to change the serialization type, and we are also going to do some tests, because the only test which we have right now on the end-to-end test is taking or considering the stateless mechanism, or the stateless execution type. Now we have to change and also implement the stateful testing type. And for that, we will also start using a new tool or new library which is called test containers. So we start to use test containers to be able to run Artemis inside a container and to run this on the test itself. Yeah, but I think that's basically it. So I hope you have liked this, you enjoyed this video, and I hope you also enjoy the next one. It's going to be a really nice one with some introduction to test containers. But that's it. If you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, please do it. I really need your support. Also share with your friends, add comments, ask questions, also give suggestions in case you have it. Ask if you want to learn something else which you think that may be a good fit to include on this course. Please just do it. Add a comment, send me a message, and let's chat. That's it. See you on the next video. Bye bye.